Good morning, our viewers. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I am the President of Council for Strategic Affairs. Today is September 16th, Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern Day Time in New York and Washington, D.C. It is 7:30 p.m. in India. Today, we are going to have a distinguished lecture by General Syed Hasnain. Those of you who registered probably saw this flyer that tells you the topic for today's distinguished oration. It is military diplomacy, international relations, and geopolitics. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs before we go on to actual lecture. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. The Council fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. CSA supports track to diplomacy and cultural diplomacy. We foster people-to-people dialogue to improve understanding. CSA condemns terrorism in all its forms worldwide. And CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. We have a monthly roundtable discussion, usually on second Saturday of each month, and a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert, usually on fourth Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. EDT. Yeah. We also have a new feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanji, a one-on-one interview on topical issues. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. And finally, we have a research fellowship training program in strategic studies. And as you see, this is the picture of our distinguished guest today, General Syed Hasnain. General Hasnain is a highly decorated soldier. He is a retired general of the Indian Army with more than 40 years of service. His last assignment in service was as the military secretary of the Indian Army. He commanded the Indian Army's 15th Corps in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, amongst other appointments. He also commanded the 21 Strike Corps. In 2018, General Hasnain was appointed the Chancellor of Central University of Kashmir. He is much sought after speaker and writes for major Indian newspapers like Times of India, the Indian Express, the Hindu, the Deccan Chronicle, the Asian Age, besides being a regular participant in television debates on mainstream television. Those of you who saw the Indian Express today probably read his column. He has graciously appeared on CSA platform several times before. He has been everywhere. He has participated in United Nations operations in Mozambique to Rwanda. He served 7 tours in Jammu and Kashmir. He was decorated in almost all of them. He is one of the foremost writers and analysts on J&K, Pakistan, Middle East, transnational extremist violence. He has a very strong academic background from Sherwood College in Nainital, St. Stephen's College in Delhi, Royal College of Defense Studies, King's College London, and Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii. He has been at the forefront of encouraging adoption of the US-initiated scholar warrior concept in the Indian Army. He has spoken at Lee Kuan Yew School for Public Policy, the Rajaratnam School for International Studies, and Indian Institute for South Asian Studies in Singapore. He has spoken at International Institute of Strategic Studies in London. He is associated with Vivekananda International Foundation, Center for Joint Warfare Studies as Distinguished Fellow, and is on the governing council of the Indian Council of World Affairs and Indian Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. General Hasnain has 6 decorations awarded by the President of India and 2 by the Army Chief. He is also member of the National Disaster Management Agency, which is headed by the Prime Minister. I must say, he is practitioner par excellence of the military diplomacy. A little bit about today's topic. I may say modern diplomacy is a multi-dimensional and multifaceted art and science. So when we talk about diplomacy, any nation's toolbox for safeguarding its national interests and fostering international relations has multiple tools in the toolbox that include track 1 diplomacy, which is the usual regular official diplomacy, but also track 1.5 diplomacy, track 2 diplomacy by think tanks and other organizations, military and defense diplomacy, cultural diplomacy and soft power projection, people to people diplomacy, diaspora for diplomacy like brand ambassadors as NRIs are, checkbook diplomacy, and finally, we have come to realize there's something called debt threat trap diplomacy. So this is a picture of military diplomacy, which is an essential foreign policy tool. Again, military diplomacy, which is very, very important in shaping a nation's foreign policy. Military or defense diplomacy must not be conflated with gunboat diplomacy. A prime example of modern era gun diplomacy is China sending its Coast Guard fleet in the West Philippine Sea around the Scarborough Shoals. An important modern example of military defense diplomacy is the annual Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore that is organized by International Institute of Strategic Studies. Every country utilizes the military or defense diplomacy. Posting of military attaché is a norm in the embassy all over the world. I must say modern soldiers, besides fighting wars, also serve as nations' diplomats. They serve in UN peacekeeping operations, which are basically a good example of military diplomacy. Joint military exercises serve as good confidence building measures and boost security and strategic stability. This is a picture of USS Enterprise, a part of 7th Fleet, and I put it there because this was an example of gunboat diplomacy in 1971. And of course, China's military diplomacy in Southeast Asia. And this is an example of China's gunboat diplomacy in West Philippine Sea. A few housekeeping rules. Please keep muted yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our distinguished speaker. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questioners, please. All questions are moderated and have to be sent through chat room. Please don't send comments in the form of a monologue. This event is being recorded. It's being simultaneously live streamed on our YouTube channel, and it will also be available on our website within 24 hours. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain to deliver this distinguished lecture on military diplomacy. Sir, the floor is yours. Please go ahead and start.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yatyanji. Thank you so much. Let me express my profuse gratitude to you for inviting me to deliver a distinguished lecture through your excellent think tank, with which I have been associated now for some time. and for picking a topic, a theme, which has been very close to my heart for many years. Military diplomacy is not a subject with which people are transparently familiar. It's really a derived subject, not a subject studied academically. And as I go along, I'll try and explain to you, my very distinguished audience, as to what are my perceptions on this. There could be differences of opinion. I was asked to speak on this subject about 6 months ago in the Chanakya dialogues in New Delhi. Conscious of the fact that I had barely 15 to 17 minutes available there, I kept my talk very, very anecdotal after giving a few definitions. I thought that would be a way of generating interest in the audience and leaving an impact for future discussions using these anecdotes. Somehow it gelled very well. The talk became very popular on YouTube because it was recorded, and on social media, a lot of prompting took place. A Strategic Affairs magazine also invited me to write a piece on military diplomacy. Given the fact that the anecdotal approach was so successful, these two instances of writing and speaking at the earlier dialogue, I'm constrained not to adopt any other approach other than this approach today. Yet I will make some basic clarifications in the beginning itself and then resort to some anecdotes, stories to highlight some issues regarding military diplomacy, which hopefully will appeal to my very esteemed audience. This should not create an impression that I am a storyteller more than an analyst. I assure you, I continue to remain an analyst more than a storyteller. By military diplomacy, we do not at all mean coercive diplomacy. And I think, Dr. Datyan, you have clearly explained this to you, that gunboat diplomacy, in my definition, does not form any part of military diplomacy. Or the threat of the use of the military to achieve objectives in foreign policy. We do not consider this to be military diplomacy. Mr. Kamal Sibbal, today who has been appointed the Chancellor of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and who's India's former Foreign Secretary, while delivering a very similar lecture at the USI some time ago, explained right at the beginning that the concept of military diplomacy might suggest that it can be distinguished from civilian diplomacy and might have an autonomous space in the conduct of India's foreign policy. Very interesting issue which he raised. I, however, do not subscribe to any perception of military diplomacy being standalone, under no circumstances. It remains a subset of political diplomacy or simply of the nation's foreign policy. Military diplomacy does imply that in conducting relations between states in many dimensions, which is the core function of diplomacy, the military has a role that goes beyond the security and defense of the country against external threats. That is beyond the military domain, the classic military domain. It spills into avoidance of conflict and promotion of peace, building sustainable cooperative relationships and trust, perception management, changing mindsets, clarifying elements of our foreign policy to interlocutors through the military route, and generally improving understandings with those they interact with externally. When two militaries, and this is a commonly accepted norm, when two militaries learn to trust each other, you can be assured that relations at the political level will be the best. You can take the example of Mr. Vajpayee's excellent efforts at building peace with Pakistan way back in 1998-99. If you remember, he made the effort of going to Lahore, but the Pakistan army, with whom, if we had had a good army-to-army relationship, would have facilitated this perhaps as a part of the foreign policy of Pakistan, which would have obviously meant a response from the foreign policy angle from India. That could not happen because of the lack of trust between the Indian army and the Pakistan army. And you know what ensued. It was Kargil which which subsequently ensued. So, national security strategy always includes the element of military diplomacy, although we don't have a published national security strategy as we are aware. But somewhere in the working environment of national security strategy, always there's an element of military diplomacy. The military may lack tact or diplomatic training, the usage of the right terminologies, language, etc. But it does not lack the ability to use the opportunities that the profession offers for problem solving or enhancing relations between nations. Leveraging of national interest using military issues as the facilitators is actually military diplomacy. Now, I'm going to try and give you a couple of definitions, meanings of this. First of all, what is the aim? In short, the aim of military diplomacy, co-opting the military domain to build trust, exchange information, afford interoperability, and smoothen the course to political diplomacy. So therefore, it remains a subset of political diplomacy. As a definition, one definition says the profession, activity, or skill of managing international relations, typically by a country's representatives abroad, is what diplomacy is all about. The art of dealing with people in a sensitive and tactful way is what political diplomacy is all about. Under that, exploiting the military domain to achieve this is what military diplomacy is. Now, there are some reasons why the military to military approach works well. First of all, one of the biggest advantages is the linkage of the uniform, the ethos of the job, and the sense of honor which is associated with it. Every profession has got a sense of honor, but the military profession is known by reputation to have a slight edge in terms of a higher level of honor. The military has a worldview, sometimes with less encumbrances than what political functionaries or bureaucrats or diplomats themselves may have. The ability or the propensity of soldiers to work together confirms the ability of nations to work together. I think a classic example is the Department of Peacekeeping Operations in the United Nations, where you have people from different countries coming together to work together. I've had that experience, and I should explain that through that experience too. The execution of military diplomacy, as I will anecdotally explain a little later, military diplomacy also goes to the extent of countering adversary interests in the larger community of nations, and especially those specific narratives which are brought to bear against us to score brownie points, win favors, and put us on the back foot. Military diplomacy assumes that the three services, the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, have a coordinated view of their diplomatic role, and mechanisms exist to produce a shared and a coherent perspective. In the Indian case, in our case study, this may not entirely be true. It's because the level of jointness, the level of integration, which is just about really starting in our case because of the theaterization, which has not yet gone underway, is still not been achieved. Perhaps this is something which is which can be considered as work in progress. The specific USPs for different contingencies exist with different organizations, but ever since the raising of the headquarter integrated defense staff, the headquarter IDS, and now with the chief of the defense staff in place with his Department of Military Affairs, this coordination is likely to come about a little more coherently as far as India is concerned. I do believe that the Defense Intelligence Agency, which has been in existence now for almost 22 years, has a very important role in this entire game as the controller of the defense attaches and the dispenser of processed briefs on geopolitics and other connected military matters with military orientation, that is geopolitics with military orientation. These briefs are normally given out by the DIA to all the embassies and the high commissions around the world. We can therefore assume that military diplomacy can finally be defined as the employment of military resources, including knowledge and military soft power, in a non-offensive manner to create or facilitate a positive working environment, promote trust, build narratives of our interests, and counter those working against our interests. It is a subset of political diplomacy, just to repeat myself. On its back, many times rides what is called the national strategic outlook. There's a misnomer that in India, military professionals are not sufficiently well versed in geopolitics and foreign affairs and are not academically oriented. How should I explain this to my esteemed audience here? That the military community is actually one of the most overtrained communities among professionals, and geopolitics is a natural with them. The Indian Armed Forces conduct long training programs and courses where geopolitics gets integrated with military science to give a wholesome rounding to the minds of the middle level officers well versed with some aspects of knowledge, which plays an important role in the diplomatic environment. Science and technology, disaster management, hybrid conflict, terrorism, and such like subjects which have a common denominator with foreign affairs are extensively researched and discussed. The Defense Services Staff College course, which is very famous and commonly known in India, the United States and UK, everywhere, the higher command course of all the three services, the higher defense management course, and the National Defense College course at New Delhi, besides a host of other courses, contribute to the meat of the intellect of the armed forces. Besides these, there are advanced technical courses of the technical arms, which produce outstanding technical leaders and administrators. To add to this is research and writing skills. All such officers have great articulation and social skills to match their academic acumen. When you roll command experience into all this experience, especially at flag rank, you have virtually the most well-rounded and comprehensively prepared leaders or staff officers who find military diplomacy as second nature. One cannot discount the worth of foreign training programs and our own in-house training for foreign armed forces. The friendships created are networks for life. I myself am a member of a couple of alumni lists around the world, the Royal College of Defense Studies, of the King's College London, of the Asia Pacific Center at Hawaii. The friendships created are networks for life. Our outreach to Africa and within South Asia many times rides on this. The various staff colleges set up in Africa, for example, I'm aware of it in Uganda, in Zambia, in Nigeria. They are institutions of excellence. Student officers from Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Afghanistan, and Nepal are better versed with India's foreign policy narratives because of the attendance of these courses. Many a time it helps in operational contingencies, such as when the Nepal earthquake took place in 2015, or the rescue operations from Iraq in 2003. Many Iraqi officers had attended the Staff College course in Wellington, and many Nepali officers had graduated from the Indian Military Academy at Dehradun. Having made a case for the worth of the military human resources, let me also turn to the domains of functioning very briefly. I shall describe some of these and accompany them with an explanation. The defense attaches, of which Dr. Diatinji had just spoken, are selected by the most stringent process as far as the Indian Armed Forces is concerned. Each DA brings to his embassy and high commission at least from 20 to 30 years of service, having commanded at least 1,000 to 5,000 troops, and experienced several challenges on the line of control and the line of actual control. Many years ago, I was on a visit to the Royal Kingdom of Jordan as a part of a delegation from the Royal College of Defence Studies, RCDS. And I was attending this program for about a year in London. Towards the end of the year, the month of October or so, we went on this long tour of Middle East, Turkey, etc., and some other countries. There were about 18 officers with me from 14 to 15 different countries. As per practice, the RCDS course gets access at very high levels because of perhaps the influence of the British embassies around the world. So here too, we got access to call on His Majesty King Abdullah of Jordan. We had a brief from him, we had an interaction, a conversation with him. And this conversation was a lot to do with political Islam, how Jordan was doing its bit to promote the moderate street of Islam. Most questions on this issue of political Islam came from me because I was also writing a dissertation on this subject while I was pursuing the course. So while I was putting these questions to His Majesty King Abdullah, he quipped to his advisors, why don't you get a copy of the Amman message and give it to the brigadier? I was then a brigadier. So they went and got a copy and gave it to me. It's worth actually Googling what is the Amman message. It's a yearly message which is given out from the Royal Court of Jordan. And it's essentially a get-together of different sects, different elements within Islam, and who come and discuss for a couple of days various issues about the faith, and then issue a kind of an edict to everyone to come together and prevent Islam being hijacked by the extremist radical street. For Islam to follow a moderate middle path kind of a street. So I was very happy when he handed this over to me. But in the tea break, as we went for tea, the king came to my side and inquired whether I knew anything about a regiment called Skinner's Horse of the Indian Army. I, of course, replied in the affirmative. I said it is the senior most armored corps regiment or the cavalry regiment of the Indian Army. He then explained to me that he was seeking a visit to the Skinner's Horse in Jodhpur while he was about to proceed on a visit in the next 2 months or so to India, a state visit to India. But no one in the embassy at Amman seemed to understand what this was all about. And he explained to me that the Skinner's Horse and his own regiment, because King Abdullah was commissioned from Sandhurst, he joined for 3 years, he served in the Royal Hussars, and which is also a cavalry regiment. The Royal Hussars and the Skinner's Horse have an affiliation with each other. You know, they have exchanges which keep taking place. And this is very dear to soldiers, these kind of linkages. All he wanted to do was that when he went on a state visit to India, he wanted to spend a day with Skinner's Horse. Somehow, no one could understand it in our embassy there. So I took it upon myself immediately. And yes, of course, there was no defense attaché posted there. There was no defense attaché at that embassy. I rang up the foreign division of the Indian Army headquarters, the MI directorate immediately, and informed them about this, explained this whole thing to them, and this visit could be executed. I was very happy that this could be executed because of the explanation one could offer to them. No one had given this explanation to the army headquarters. So this is a typical case, I say, where a knowledge of the military, linkages between the military come to the fore sometimes to help out in certain issues regarding foreign policy. On the same tour of the RCDS, when I was in the Middle East, I visited Turkey. 7, 8, 9 days, I think I was in Turkey. The first leg of the visit was Amman. My flight came into Ankara late, 2 a.m. at night. There was a Turkish protocol to receive us. The other defense attachés would have been there to receive us if the flight had come on time. But since the flight was 8 hours delayed almost, no defense attaché was there. So we were all gathering around there when suddenly out of the blue appeared one defense attaché. Who was this? The Indian defense attaché. Out of the blue, he suddenly appeared. Name was Ajay Talwar, a gentleman cadet of mine from the IMA, my time when I was instructor there. At 2 a.m., he was properly shaven, fully energetic, perfect turnout, and he did the Indian Army proud by his presence because the RCDS members, the members of the course, could not stop admiring his dedication and discipline in the light of the fact that none of the other defense attachés had cared to stay back at the airport to receive their respective officers. The next evening was a wonderful reception at the British ambassador's residence. The ambassador learnt that I was from India, started to relate to me how he appreciated the capabilities of Indian Army officers. He admitted that whenever he was stuck for an answer to any query regarding history or even the local culture of Turkey, he referred back to the Indian DA, who briefed him with all the details in a matter of hours. He quipped to me, "Your officers must be really of the highest quality." I was in seventh heaven because this was within earshot of officers from 14, 15 other countries. And India was being projected so positively, as were the Indian Army and its people. Ajay Talwar, Brigadier Ajay Talwar, endeared himself to the whole delegation, the RCDS delegation, for his quick answers to all queries and being readily at hand to help not just me, to help anyone, to the extent of even suggesting the best Turkish baths in Ankara. He was that good. So it just shows the kind of personalities you choose to send abroad and how they actually, are become force multipliers in the projection of national image. The domain where the armed forces bring their professional acumen to the fore and project the nation as none other is the domain of UN peacekeeping. Now, there you could be a military observer, you could be a staff officer, or you could be an armed peacekeeper. The professionalism itself is a projection. So, watching our contingent in Rwanda, United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda, of which I was a proud member, the Rwandese Patriotic Army, RPA, expressed its desire to us to send a few officers on courses to India. Most of our training teams in Africa, and we've had many training teams, were set up through this route, through the image created by our contingents in the UN missions, in which they were working side by side with different African armies. And I can even name the unit in Rwanda was none other than the 1st, 3rd Gurkha Rifles, because of whose excellent image that it had created within the mission, this kind of a projection could be achieved. Now, something on almost the same lines happened in the UNIBEN mission in Rwanda, where I had led the Indian military observer team. See, 3 months after our arrival here, let me just put this anecdotally. 3 months after our arrival there was a conference called at the headquarters in Kigali. All 8 sector commanders, all the sector operations officers were called together to come and brief the special representative of the Secretary General, the SRSG. Who was the SRSG? None other than Mr. Shahryar Khan, the Foreign Secretary, ex-Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, and Pakistan's Secretary of its Cricket Control Board. Now, I was one of the senior most, so I commenced the briefings. Typical way, the Indian Army way, went up and explained the map and explained my resources, broadly brought out my tasks, the threats to me, and thereafter the broad plan of how I was deployed and how I anticipated that I could function for the next 3 months. Mr. Shahryar Khan gave me a very approving look, and thereafter, one after the other 7 sectors came up to brief. Not a single sector commander walked up. Only the operations officers came. In all 7 cases, the operations officers came to brief. One after the other, every operations officer was an Indian from my team. When the 4th officer had briefed, Mr. Shahryar Khan turned around to me and said, Colonel Hasnain, then I was a colonel, is there any operations officer in the mission who is not an Indian? I said, no, Your Excellency, all are Indians. Now, anyone who is in the military profession knows operations officers are always considered to be at the highest pedestal. And I explained to him, all my officers have passed their staff college course, all selected, very deep selection, and that is why they are performing the duties of operations officers out here. At the end, in the summing up, he actually said, I could not have expected this standard from the Pakistan Army. That was a real embedment of our high morale at that stage. He's just stating this. This is for the Pakistan Foreign Secretary to state this internationally at a gathering to say that the Indian Army had really shown itself in very admirable light. Now, taking this a little beyond, let me also say that while serving in another UN mission in Mozambique, I was with the United Nations mission in Mozambique. We had a very strange subunit with us from the Indian Army. It was a headquarter company and comprised about 100 all arms, 100 personnel. All of them were either clerks or military policemen. It was to assist the UN mission headquarters. Now, sure enough, within a few weeks, I started getting stopped in the corridors of the mission headquarters by strangers requesting me for a minute's time. Each had a sob story of the amount of work that they had in their office. The conversation always ended with a sincere request to provide their officer with an Indian clerk, an Indian Army clerk. We wanted to know how this demand got generated, and we're told that if an officer, the perception which prevailed in the mission was that if an office had an Indian Army clerk, the occupants of that office could relax because receipt, dispatch, filing, and drafting could all be done by the single clerk. And all others could have long lunch and tea breaks, and their weekends were guaranteed. So an office without an Indian clerk was considered inefficient and too lowly. So it seeps down to those lower levels. But these clerks were basically havaldars, sergeants. That was the level. But at that level too, the Indian Army had done such deep selection that the finest among the finest of our clerks had been sent to the UN mission. And they were really projecting the true worth of their profession. After a few years after my retirement, I visited Iran and helped the Indian mission to project the right narratives on Jammu and Kashmir to the Iranian media, which was being fed a diet of pro-Pakistan propaganda on everyday basis. I faced the Iranian media in its multiple media television channels and responded to many questions by the print media. The queries all seemed to be drafted in Islamabad by Pakistan's inter-services intelligence. They knew nothing about the Shimla Agreement of 1972 and kept harping on the UN resolutions of 1948-49. I had to talk extensively about the ill treatment of East Pakistan population, leading to the breakaway and the creation of Bangladesh, of which hardly any people in Iran were really aware. So, long and short of it is, veterans of the Indian Armed Forces are knowledgeable about these issues, and internationally, they can help any mission. If called upon, if you have a band of people being called upon to different missions, different seminars, etc., they can actually bring a completely different line of thinking to these events there. Let us look at some of the relations with our neighbors, near abroad. That is India, that is Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, etc. Very briefly, let me mention that whenever I visited Nepal, and I visited Nepal twice recently, 4 times on landing, I rang up my IMA, Indian Military Academy course mate, Lieutenant General Taran J.B. Singh. He received me at the airport, and he took me around the earthquake-affected areas in 2015 and briefed me on the aid effort from India. Therefore, I could come back and write about this in the media. This linkage made it so simple for me to be able to fly into Nepal, gather the right information, come back and be able to project what really were the requirements of Nepal. My visit to Bangladesh a few years ago as a veteran has many lessons for us. It is one of the countries in our neighborhood with whom we should have a transformational relationship while retaining its national character, culture, and all its interests. The underlying message I conveyed during my visit to Bangladesh through my talks at the Bangladesh NDC, its Directorate General of Forces Intelligence, and the Bangladesh Institute of Strategic Studies, was that we in India were in total support of Bangladesh. And the Indian Army was proud of our joint victory in 1971. I saw the Pakistan Deputy High Commissioner squirming in her seat, hearing this statement. I reinforced India's support by giving the audience an analysis of the deep rooted fanaticism and radicalism being promoted locally in Bangladesh by the rump elements of the Jamaat-e-Islami, which existed even after the Pakistan army was jointly defeated in 1971. I praised the Bangladesh efforts to control and eradicate radicalism. Next morning, I was in the media all over with full appreciation of India's efforts at defeating terrorism in South Asia. 6 months later, the Islamic State tried to establish a foothold in Bangladesh, but was defeated by the Bangladesh intelligence, as we are aware. For this talk, I had even the Prime Minister's military secretary attending the talk and giving feedback to her. Unfortunately, I was one of the first Indian Army general officers to give such a strategic talk in Dhaka. From 1971 till 2016, not one general officer had been invited to give such a talk at these institutions. That was sad. Today, I think this thing has changed to a great extent. In 2017, going beyond some more examples, the Singapore government invited me for a 5-day interactive visit to advise it on threats from radicalism and terrorism. It led to an interaction at the highest levels of government, including the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, and the Foreign Minister, different academic institutions, think tanks, and the Singapore Police Department. It was a single-handed projection of the Indian Army's assessment and advisory capability, contributing to national image and strengthening of what would be termed as military academic diplomacy. So with the excellent success of Atmanirbharta, which has been initiated by Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, or the self-reliance in defense manufacturing, and the export potential being progressively ramped up in India, now India needs to step up its salesmanship, capture markets, and showcase Indian products in defense exhibitions and technology shows the world over. We need not rely only on serving officers to be salespersons for this. They need to continue remaining as DAs, while much of the work can still be done on a 24/7 basis by a set of identified professionals, irrespective of seniority or age. Everyone needs to work together, but not in a hierarchical fashion. Military diplomacy must adopt this style as the need of the hour. I'm coming towards the end of my talk. A few more issues. It's in the field of defense manufacturing, the sale of Indian defense products, the thorough understanding of conflicts, whether it's maritime or continental, and influencing of narratives that military diplomacy can indeed play a major role for now. As the Indian economy grows, like you're aware, from 3.6, 5 trillion to 10 trillion, the need for better military intellectual capital will be felt for all the above domains. Military diplomacy is already such an important element of international relationships that political diplomacy actually comes in at a later stage. A good example is the Indo-US 2+2 dialogue, now repeated with many other countries. The defense side matches the external affairs domain in the outreach to build partnerships. I can remind people about Exercise Malabar. It started way back in 1991. One of the first initiatives, military diplomatic initiatives by India, is still continuing till today on an expanded format. The Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, or ITEC for short, is the leading capacity building platform at the Ministry of External Affairs, the Government of India. Instituted in 1964, ITEC is one of the oldest arrangements for international capacity building, having trained more than 200,000 officials from 160 countries in both the civilian and the defense sector. This is an excellent example of using the stamp of excellence of some of our institutions and of the armed forces training teams abroad to spread Indian presence. The networks so established will eventually pay great dividend in the development of relationships. Many times, it is tempting to quote the US model. The US provides the most illuminating example of the use of its military capacities as a powerful instrument of its foreign policy. This it has done through alliance systems such as NATO, through which it dominates Europe, and alliances with individual countries, which gives it, as the stronger partner, considerable influence over their foreign policies. Through arms sales and military aid, training of foreign military officers, joint exercises, many of them with India, military to military contacts, exchange of top level visits, periodic publication of strategic and defense reviews, reports prepared by the Pentagon related think tanks, the United States gives large space to the military in its external relations. If India is gaining confidence to ultimately be the third largest economy of the world, it will need to think like a big power, and for that, military diplomacy will be not just a necessity, but absolutely mandatory. It's also necessary to mention that of the other traditional areas which have contributed towards diplomacy, visits and port calls by ships of the Indian Navy, the perception created by the various rescue missions employed by the Navy and the Air Force have also been unmatched by any other nation. Recently, only in Sudan, the relief efforts in Sudan, images of Indian ships in joint exercises in such as Malabar project a different capability. Imagery of any kind is a huge communication. The recent photograph of Air Chief Marshal V. Chaudhary taking over a C-295 transport aircraft in Spain at the manufacturing end says much and is again excellent military projection. Lastly, I recall how I learned of the Pakistan strategy of perception management of its narratives. Pakistan is a past master at perception management of its narratives. It was in Israel where I was attending the Hazariyah Summit on the global counterterrorism. I was presenting a paper on Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan's proxy role, and remained under a perception that no Pakistani would be present since Israel and Pakistan do not have diplomatic relations. At breakfast, however, I had 3 Pakistani representatives sitting and having breakfast with me. Pakistan follows a system of using knowledgeable academics, intelligence, and service officers to be present at all identified seminars at major cities around the world. It brings its narratives to the fore and attempts to counter those which are inimical to them. Military diplomacy, therefore, cannot remain as a domain of just wishful thinking. The Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Defense need to act in concert, and with the Office of the Chief of the Defense Staff as the driver, we need to look forward to a surge in organized campaigns with full exploitation of capabilities of all our different resources. Our diplomats are among the best in the world. Our armed forces, too, will never be found wanting in this field, the field of military diplomacy. Jai Hind, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, General Hasnain, for a very fascinating and informative lecture on military diplomacy. I'm sure we'll have questions from the audience, but this was indeed eye-opening, pointing to the role of military diplomacy in overall modern diplomatic efforts in any nation's foreign relations, international relations, and geopolitical advancement of national interests. I had a couple of sort of instances that I wanted to highlight to you. In 2021, when Taliban took over Afghanistan for the second time, there was a person by name Sher Muhammad Abbas Stanekzai, who was the political chief of Taliban in their Doha office. And he was a gentleman cadet at Indian Military Academy in Dehradun from 1979 to 1982. How much did that linkage help India to evacuate our personnel, our diplomatic personnel, citizens, and even Afghan Hindus and Sikhs from Afghanistan to India?
Thank you for that excellent reference and that excellent query. It's just coincidental that Stanek Zai happened to be a cadet of mine. I was also posted at the Indian Military Academy at that time as a directing staff. And Stanek Zai, minus his beard, was very much there present as a gentleman cadet in the Karen company of the Bhagat Battalion. Indian Army would know those terminologies of those things at the IMA. No, Stanek Zai, definitely, I mean, having spent close to 2 years in the academy, had a soft corner. And I will relate this issue to some other countries also subsequently. Had a soft corner for India. He had worked with Indians. And while he was in Qatar, subsequently in Kabul also, he had a reasonable relationship, some kind of a back channel relationship with the Indian embassy and Indian embassy functionaries. I've spoken extensively to the Indian embassy people, and I visited the Indian embassy in Kabul twice. So I am aware of the 6 kilometers distance between the embassy to the airport and how difficult it was to actually negotiate that. That it was a question of getting through that. There was a bugger's muddle there, absolutely, in that area. I'm told that the Taliban actually guided the Indian personnel out. Now, you must remember that it was one aspect is the relationship with Stanek Zai, and the other was the matter of the fact that India's soft power had been played out outstandingly in Afghanistan. And it was very largely military soft power. Of course, the parliament building was being built, which was financed and things like that, but a lot of work done by the Border Roads Organization in building those roads in Afghanistan, in some of the power, helping in the power grid. There were lots of excellent engineers who were helping out in the power grid. There were a lot of other personnel within the embassy. There were English guides there, etc. Our linkages, in the sense, we may not have had direct linkages with the Taliban, but overall the impression and image was that India was not in any way animostic towards the Taliban and towards the people of Afghanistan. And that, I think, carried the day to a great extent. And Stanek Zai, by virtue of his presence there, and along with them a couple of others, Stanek Zai, of course, rose to be at the level of the foreign minister, but there were others who were also there, who helped in this, facilitated this whole process of the de-induction of personnel from there. And let me tell you, this kind of a thing can be extended around the world. I mentioned about Iraq, it helped in Iraq. I mentioned about Sudan, it has helped in Sudan too. Our DAs are constantly in touch, and that's one of the very important aspects of if you attend a course abroad anywhere, you must continue to remain on the alumni list. Something awkward because the intelligence rules in most countries deny their officers the ability to actually transparently remain in touch with the country in which they've attended the course. Today, I am in touch with everyone who was with me in the UK from 42 countries. All of them who were with me in Hawaii. All of them who were with me in the United Nations. I'm in touch with almost everyone on a fortnightly, monthly basis. Many of them are part of WhatsApp groups, etc. Tomorrow, if I have to land up somewhere, like I was telling you, landing up in Nepal, I had to only call up my coursemate to tell him, please receive me at the airport. Take me around. And he took me around everywhere. These things help tremendously. No doubt, in every profession, even diplomats will have these kind of networks everywhere. But the military has something special, and that is the uniform. The uniform helps bringing that linkage, a commonality of thinking and a linkage of the physicality of the uniform.
Thank you, General Hasnain. We have a question in the chat room, and I'm going to read the question. It's from Mr. Bhagwat. It is said that prior to 1947, Indian Army fought on the wrong side of history to use military diplomacy in furtherance of national objectives. The national leadership must possess adequate knowledge of how to wield this strategic tool. Given lack of strategic culture in our country in general, is Indian political and diplomatic leadership genuinely aware of the power and making adequate and proper use of this unique asset?
Marvelous question. I must admire this question. Absolutely. And no straight answer. But yes, 75 years after independence, something which I have been speaking on for the last 10 years after my superannuation is this aspect of the lack of strategic culture in India. Let me explain this anecdotally first. I still remember my father, who's also from the army, same unit, same regiment. After his retirement, he was also a general officer, settled in Allahabad. He was invited by the Allahabad University Defense Studies Department to come for some event. While he was there, the head of the Department of Defense Studies walked up to him and said, General Saab, you must be having the Indian Army must be having a wonderful time these days. Why? He said, there's no war, sir. There is no war, and obviously, with no war, the army has nothing to do. But we're just relaxing, sunbathing somewhere. My father came back livid home, I remember. He came and told us, he says, this man was the head of the Defense Studies Department. And he doesn't know that an army which only sweats and peace saves blood in war. I mean, literally, this was the message he conveyed to us in our youth. We sweat more in peace to save that blood in war. That aspect of strategic culture, unfortunately, has been missing. But let me admit, things are improving. And you may have heard in my bio data while being read by Dr. Yathanji that I am involved in what is called the spread of the scholar warrior concept. I tried it in the army a lot. I was very, very fortunate to be posted as the commander of the junior command wing, where I had, 400 to 450 officers passing through me every 3 months. And I said, let me change the minds of these officers. They need not think only tactically. They must think operationally. They must think strategically. At 7, 8 years of service, who says they don't have the brain to think strategically? We have been unnecessarily subverting ourselves to this idea that our officers do not have the intellect to be able to understand issues at a larger level. And this is the unfortunate thing, compartmentalization of jobs, tasks. This is your job, this is my job. The politician says, "Aap apna kaam kariye, keep the border safe, the rest of India is safe." Not realizing your border may be safe, the rest of India may be hollow. So I fully empathize with the perception of this question that there's no doubt we've had a problem. Some of it is because of the fact that after independence, no one really understood what is the need of the army. We are aware that our first prime minister actually mentioned, I'm not sure if I can't really be quoted, but did probably mention somewhere that all that India needed was a police force. We needed no weapons because we had no enemies in the world. Our threat perception was there is no enemy in the world. It's after 62 that things started happening. So today, at what stage are we today? I'd say improving, marginally improving. Lots of think tanks have come up. Defense service studies departments in different places have come up. The Rashtriya Raksha University has come up in Gujarat. I wish the National Defense University comes up in Delhi, Haryana in the near future at some time. Because we need to now contribute people to military thinking. It's not just war fighting. The military profession is not just war fighting. A lot of people think that the profession is war fighting. It's technologies, it is larger issues, strategic issues, it's man management, it's leadership. I mean, thousands of things, military diplomacy. You can specialize in so many things as such. So hopefully it's a slow process which is happening, this transformation which we are looking at. But I am quite confident that as we go along, this is going to happen and probably make a difference.
Thank you, General Hasnain. Using my moderator's prerogative, I may add a couple of comments here in the same vein. Actually, things are not so bleak as they were in 1947. Situation is changing very rapidly to the extent that people really don't realize. I do remember General K. Sundarji, who was given the epithet of the thinking general. So Indian Army, Indian Armed Forces have actually changed their image and they are looking at things. Some of the other things that people do not realize that most of the generals and most of the chief of staffs nowadays have a PhD degree in strategic, studies or international relations or military sciences. It is not, it's almost a common occurrence at higher echelons of the army or other forces. But a good reflection of this transformation in the armed forces about diplomacy and uh, strategic studies is the recent example when three retired top level officers, General Manoj Naravane, Air Marshal Bhadoria, and Admiral Karanveer Singh, visited Taiwan in Keragalan Forum. That was a very unique moment. You know, it served its purpose, it did some signaling, but it shows now the proactive nature of India's military or defense diplomacy. 10 years ago, you would not even think of retired military personnel visiting Taiwan. Any comments on that?
May I, if I may comment on what you have just said? Yes, I also wrote on this quite extensively. I'm sorry, I should have actually mentioned this in this talk. This visit by the three retired chiefs was an out of the box kind of a diplomatic event. I would say it was actually India's gray zone war against China. If anyone in China was observing this, we would wonder what the hell were the three Indian armed forces, retired officers of the three Indian armed officers, recently retired, doing at a think tank in Taiwan at that particular time. India is not known to have a military to military relationship with Taiwan, not transparently at least. It is not known to have anything to do gelling of the armed forces as such. And how suddenly out of the blue these people landed up there. So I ascribed it to a strategy which the Chinese use against us. Gray zone. Let them keep thinking. Let them keep dwelling on this to establish what is actually the truth behind it. And I hope we do take many more such measures in the future.
Okay, I'll read another question from the chat room. It is by Mr. Venkatraman. General Sir, thank you for your excellent talk. I am tempted to ask that to what extent can we prioritize military diplomacy over the soft power promotion, given the fact that the overwhelming presence of Indian diaspora in many countries, which can be better utilized to our advantage?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's again a very, very apt question. But I would say, why should we look at giving priority? Why can't we have a balance? Both the things have their importance in their own domains. Military diplomacy and soft power. And actually, I am one who uses the term military soft power. Many times I use this terminology called military soft power. I used military soft power very, very effectively in Jammu and Kashmir, let me tell you. And I called it that, spoke to the media and told them what I am doing is military soft power, which was essentially an outreach to the people, reaching out to their minds, explaining to them what were the narratives which were being played, what were the narratives of our nation, of India, why must the people support India, why must the people be with the Indian army. These narratives were all being played out through a soft power approach. And one of the aspects of soft power was the restoration of dignity to the people. wherein I instructed my troops that you will never be rude to a person, irrespective of whatever be the profession, whatever be the standing of that person. I used to get complaints of people of high standing that they are stopped at checkpoints, etc., and indiscriminately they are abused, etc. I put an end to all that. And that I thought was military soft power in a very great way. Here now, you've got a diaspora, and Prime Minister Modi has made excellent use of that diaspora, actually, to project the Indian image abroad. And today you're seeing in the United States itself, you are having presidential candidates coming up from within the diaspora itself, right? Of course, diaspora means in this case people who are now naturalized Americans as such. So we can have both ends. We can have aspects of military diplomacy being played out, a larger strategic understanding of India's compulsions being worked on them, and Indian military soft power at the same time. All this put together is all that you are looking at is the enhancement of the Indian image, a better standing for India among the community of nations and among the fraternity of Indians abroad. That's what you're looking at.
I just need to make an online apology. The first question I referred to as question from Mr. Bhagwat. Actually, now I have a clarification. It is retired Air Marshal Bhagwat who asks you the question and compliments you for your straightforward answer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Bhagwat. Thank you very much.
There is a question from Mr. Vijay Nilikeni. The US military has formal program to encourage senior Army, Navy, and Air Force officers to formally and informally study foreign policy and even give them leave of absence to attend elite universities and get a deeper understanding of global geopolitics, strategic issues, etc. Many even get advanced degrees. Does Indian government have a similar formal program to advance the deeper understanding of strategy, geopolitical underpinnings of the peace, etc.?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Again, a brilliant question, absolutely. And a very necessary one for at the end of a lecture such as this. Yes, sir, this understanding did come late. As I told you that in India, the common understanding was that we are all boxed into our domains. And that why should the military study geopolitics? Why should the military study foreign policy? There's nothing to do. Why should the military study politics or economics at all? Then slowly things started changing. The military itself was always studying these things. Internally, it was always studying. If you look at the syllabi of the Defense Services Staff College or of the Army War College, etc., all of them have had inclusion of all these kind of subjects: economics, political science, etc. It's only later that when we started introducing operational and strategic level courses that this got encouraged a little more. And thereafter, sometime around the late 80s, more as a management tool rather than the requirement of strategic thinking, we started sending our officers out on study leave so that, some officers could be kept out of the system for some time in peacetime conditions. We had a place to rotate the officers through. Now, over a period of time, many of these officers have gone on 2 years study leave. I would say 10 to 15% of them have actually made full use of it. It's not as robust as the American system. I've seen the American system and how seriously officers are involved in their academic studies. It's not as serious as that. I'm hoping it will become much more serious because there is an effort, right, which is going on at the moment, and a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis is being put on it. Unfortunately, and most Indian Army, armed forces people know it, this shortage of officers in the 3 armed forces is causing us a bit of a challenge. We can't afford to send out officers. We need officers with us all the time. If we send out too many officers to pursue these kind of studies, etc., when they come back to us, I mean, we can absorb them, of course, we can absorb them in different jobs, etc., but there is a dearth of officers available for field duties thereafter. So it's a management problem more than anything else. But at the end of the day, as I told you, I have this mission as the commander of the junior command wing that I want to see my people. I try to change the discourse, bring in debate, every officer to do public speaking, everyone to come and write a small essay of about 1,500 words on a subject which we would give them, something to research, the idea of research, how to do research. All this work is being done in quite a big way now today in the armed forces. The selected officers at the staff college and the higher command courses, the National Defense College, etc., are doing this very, very seriously. On par, almost at par with all other academic institutions around the country and around military institutions around the world. Many of our officers who go abroad, like as I went to the Royal College of Defense Studies, I found it very simple to just merge in because my academic background enabled me to do it. My professional capability enabled me to do that with them. So that's a heartening thing from many angles. I wish to, of course, state one thing: the American system of a White House scholar, the White House scholar, where you find very, very high-profile officers from different domains, not from the armed forces alone, medical, economics, city administration, engineers, etc., being attached to the White House as functionaries to function for 2 to 3, 4 years, and then go back to the executive role. It's an outstanding thing because it gives you an understanding at the highest levels, planning, strategic levels. Now, that is the kind of program which I have been trying to further here in India, trying to seek this. I hope I shall succeed sometime in the near future.
Thank you, General Atta Hasnain. It was a pleasure listening to you once again. You have been on our platform before, and we hope that you will continue to grace our platform in various forums, whether it is roundtable discussion, distinguished lecture, or one-on-one interview. Everyone enjoyed your presentation. I'm reading through the chat function, the gracious comments everyone is making. So thanks a lot. I also thank our audience who took almost 1.5 hours on a Saturday to attend to this lecture and participate in discussion. And finally, I would thank our team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachari, Mr. Rajiv Verma, who help me every time, with backroom arrangements and management issues. So thanks to Team CSA. And we shall be back again in the month of October with our roundtable discussion. But my heartiest thanks to Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain. Everybody enjoyed this. Thanks a lot, very much.
Thank you very much, sir.